So our apologies for the delay. Oh, here we go. We have quorum now. Say what? All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Judicial Proceedings Committee. Today is Tuesday, April 5th. We have 3 bills on the docket. We're going to start off with Delegate Bhandari with House Bill 1238. We'll then move on to House Bill 1097, and we'll wrap up with Delegate Washington with House Bill 1295. So with that, we will start off with Mr. Bhandari. Welcome. If you could come to the, unless you need that, do you need the laptop, or can you fit it up at the top just so both sides can catch you?
Right here?
Yes, please. If it's possible. If not, then whatever.
I could stand and testify?
Yes, please. But if it's easier for you to be seated, then that's fine.
Yep. Let me use this one. Chair Smith and member of the Judicial Proceedings Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Harry Bhandari, a district of Baltimore County, here to request your support for House Bill 1238. They say that politics is a game of addition. To win, you have to appeal to more people. The same is true in business. More paying customer means more profit. This bill is about addition. This bill is about bringing audiences back to movie theaters, including thousands of folk who might not normally go. That seems like a smart business to me. House Bill 1238 would require movie theaters with at least 2 locations in the state to offer open captioning, meaning captions up on the big screen for 2 screenings per movie per week. And honestly, when we weigh the number of people this would benefit against the number it would hurt, it is surprising movie theaters don't already do that. Many of the testimonials in support of this bill focus on its impact for deaf and hard of hearing people, a group which has historically been locked out of going to the movies. Some recent developments have made it possible to get closed captioning on little handheld devices. These devices must be proactively requested and can be distracting, out of sync, or plagued with technical problems. Just take a moment to imagine that you are at the movies and there is no sound. You have to glance back and forth between the action on a screen and a little device in your lap to follow what everyone is saying. Does that sound like it is worth the price of a ticket? When the House Economic Matters Committee heard this bill, a number of deaf Marylanders joined us to share their frustration with these devices not working. Mrs. Sharon Clark and her young deaf daughter, who are here today, are unable to enjoy a family movie day because of the problem caused by these devices. Mr. John Cromwell, who could not be here today, told us how he and his wife, who is deaf, could not have a simple date night without interruption. Mr. Roy Fernandez, who is a deaf, made the point that open captions are standard in his home country of India, where many different groups benefit from both English and Hindi caption. I was getting very emotional reading the hundreds of testimonials supporting this bill from older folks who can hear okay but easily miss lines, veterans who may have damaged their hearing while serving, parents who want their kids to learn as many new words as possible, English learners who are trying to improve their own communication skill. These are all potential customers who would feel a lot more welcome at a screening with open captions. Movie theaters owners have been in touch to share their concern. I understand that with me. That caption will impact ticket sales. We all know that the pandemic devastated the industry. I earnestly believe that this bill can help, not hinder the recovery. Turning on open caption does not require much more than a flip of a switch. It is not a significant cost to movie theater. I believe in encouraging more customers to patronize our local businesses. I'm not asking for a blanket mandate. If a customer has a strong objection to open captions, they can simply choose to attend a different screening. For too long, too many people have been denied this choice. Maryland is not the only state which has introduced open captioning. Hawaii has passed a similar requirement for open captioning. Studies have been done assessing the economic impact in that state, noting that the law took effect in 2019. just before the pandemic, but there is no clear evidence that requiring certain caption screening has had negative economic impact in the industry. The Speaker of the Hawaii House of Representatives has sent a letter supporting this bill. The National Association of the Deaf support this bill, and hundreds of important stakeholders here in Maryland and across the country. I will also note that this bill underwent rigorous debate in the Economic Matters Committee and in the House floor, and passed with amendment which exempted the first week of film screening and removed a requirement that one of the caption screening had to take place on the weekend. With a favorable report, as well as several committee members aided as a co-sponsor during the debate, the bill then passed the House, and on a bipartisan third reading vote of 108 to 21. My thanks to all the folks who joined us to speak on their experience, and everybody. And I'm an educator. I have been teaching for the last 15 years, and our job is to help the vulnerable one, and feel that they are being included. In this light, I respectfully request a favorable report, and I would like everybody to stand up who joined here from deaf and hard of hearing community. They have a gala. I met hundreds of them. I was very emotional. Would everybody stand up who are here in support of this bill? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Delegate. And we'll now turn to the committee for questions. I see Senator Lee has a question.
Yeah, Delegate, thank you for bringing this bill. I think this is a wonderful bill because it will include more viewers and generate revenues, and it sounds like it's just common sense and long overdue. Right now, if they don't have this, the captioning, isn't it almost impossible for those who are hard of hearing or deaf? They're not able to watch the movie, right? Because otherwise they would have to use a cell phone, which in some cases are not allowed by movie theaters because it interrupts the general operation of the other viewers seeing the movie. So this will allow them to be able to share and partake in the movie. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that is correct. But they do provide some handheld devices, as I mentioned in my testimony. These devices must be proactively requested and can be very much distracting, and they are, plagued with technical problems. And our kids, she's told us so during the testimony. So many delegates were emotional. We are talking about our kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, and it could be very annoying. Senator, you are absolutely right. This bill will help.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Bandari, I think this is the first time you've been here, isn't it?
Correct.
Well, it's nice to see you. It's
Thank you.
taken too long for you to get here. We hope you come back frequently. I, for about 25 years, was on the board of a Gilbert and Sullivan organization called the Young Victorian Theater Company. And when we put on Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, we would have a screen above the proscenium stage onto which the captions were projected. We never had anybody in the audience complain about that. It sounds from, I'm reading the opposition from some of the theater, movie companies, theater owners, and they seem to feel that some of their patrons would have a problem with captions on the screen of the movie itself. Have you considered the possibility of a screen, a screen on top of the proscenium, so that those who wanted to could look up at the screen to see the words, and with the movie then down below, as opposed to having the words on the movie itself?
Yeah, to be honest with you, that might be possibility. But if we could pass this bill this year, and thank you, Senator, I had a pleasure working with one of the deaf and hard of hearing bill. We passed together. Right. So, yep. Definitely, this is important that we pass that, and if we could do the amendment or, bring another bill, that might be for next year.
Okay. Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, I'm trying to understand the language on page 2 and 3 of the bill. It says a place of public accommodation that controls, operates, or owns or leases at least 2 motion pictures houses in the state shall provide open captioning for each motion picture it screens each week that is produced and offered with closed captioning for at least 2 screenings. So does that mean that they have to provide 2 screenings of each movie, or that this only applies to movies that are screened twice each week?
For 2 screening per movie per week.
I'm sorry, so this means that this only provides, this means you have to have 2 screenings per week?
Correct.
Of each movie?
Correct.
So it does not mean that this does not apply if you only show a movie once, if you only show the movie once?
That should be correct, but I will get back to you. And you need to want 2 movie company. If you would just want 1 company, you don't have, you are not mandated to do that.
You mean if you only own 1 theater?
Yes, 1 theater, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
I mean, some of the opposition raised the issue that sometimes they get special screens where they only get a movie one time. You get an old movie that just comes into the theater one time only, something like a Turner Classics movie. You're going to see it, it's this Saturday at 10, boom, it's done. And then what would they do then?
Based on my understanding, that was one of the amendment. The chair,
If there's an amendment
the
in there?
Economic Matters did bring that,
Okay,
yeah.
I just have, all right, I have a reprint here, but that's not in it. Okay. And then it looks like the industries is offering these. So this is every theater. So if a theater every week shows these closed caption and every week nobody comes, they would just literally have to keep running 2 screenings each week of closed caption, even if the theater was empty. They would
I
just
think
have to
that is
run-
the assumptions, to be honest with you. I have in my district, in White Marsh, we have a theater. And some of the community colleges like Frederick and other community colleges, they offer this. We're not just talking about deaf and hard of hearing. We are talking about this who want to learn English, elderly folks, and others as well, or immigrants. Like I myself is an immigrant. My English was not my first language. Then I would have to learn through different means. And Senator, that helps. It doesn't hurt. So I do respect the opposition, but that is not true. That is not true.
What is not true? That,
That will hurt the business. Yeah.
okay. I mean, I can tell you, when I have closed captioning on my TV, it's really distracting. I have to find the button and turn it off. So, I mean, obviously, there's people that use it, but I think to say that people who didn't need closed captioning will say, oh, that's fine, I'll sit through the screening with no closed captioning, is what you're
Respectfully,
suggesting.
Senator, they have options. They can go to another screening there.
They have an option to go to another screen? What do you mean? Or
Yeah,
another?
like
Come
in the
later.
theater, they will be showing another movie, and so they don't have to stay on that particular movie. Where I believe they can,
Okay. And do
have
you think there's
choices.
any validity at all to the industry's position that, hey, we're already struggling to keep theaters open as it is because everybody's watching movies at home and they're not coming to the theaters? Is there any validity to their concerns at all that they're already struggling and this would cause additional financial hardship for theaters?
Well, that is also the assumptions. As I mentioned in my testimony, they did bring the Hawaii, but we are still on pandemic, and the research does not show that. So there is no research, and as a researcher myself, I believe on the data, not on the assumption. So there is no data that prove that will hurt.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, as a researcher myself, assumptions that will help.
Okay, thank you.
All right, further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Mbari.
Thank you,
Thank you, Delegate. Thank
Senators.
you very much. Have a good one. It's good to see you here.
Thank you.
All right, with that, that'll conclude the hearing for House Bill 1238. We'll now move on to House Bill 1097. Delegate Holmes, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. What we have before us today is House Bill 1097. And Mr. Chair and members of the committee, when I presented this bill on the House floor, most of the debate, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, was unfortunately not about the bill. The debate mostly on the floor that I had to defend, Mr. Chair, was in fact discussing and debating whether appraisal bias even existed. And because of that, Mr. Chair, I think I want to spend a couple of minutes just to let everyone in JPR know that appraisal bias does in fact exist. Part of my testimony, I have provided all of you with several documents. And one of the documents that I presented to you was a Washington Post article just published on March the 27th of this year. And in that article, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, it talks about appraisal bias, and the article, as I'm going to show you here, Mr. Chair, is from the Washington Post, the business section of the Washington Post, and in fact does outline some of the appraisal bias that takes place. And on the front of this newspaper is Kim Taylor, who is in the audience, Mr. Chair, and Kim Taylor has also provided to all of you testimony to listen to look at as part of this bill hearing. Ms. Taylor is part of the article and has provided information to us, and you have this article as presented to you. If I could take a couple of moments, Mr. Chair, and again, I'm just trying to make sure that we all understand that appraisal bias is real. And if you allow me the opportunity, Mr. Chair, just to get a couple of quotes from the March 27th Washington Post. On the front page of that article, it states, and I quote, "What is a community worth? The answer all too often depends on race." Additionally, in that Washington Post article, it states, "Their experience is common. Homes in black neighborhoods are valued at 23% less on average than those in comparable white neighborhoods. Despite having a similar neighborhood and property characteristics and amenities, according to the Brookings Institute." Additionally, the Post says, the de-evaluation of black communities adds up to about $156 million in lost equity. Money that would have been invested in education and entrepreneurship. Also, Mr. Chair, it talks about just one lower appraisal could affect the cumulative wealth of an entire community, according to the new Biden administration report. The Biden administration just put out a report, and I'll get to that in a minute, on the causes, extent, and consequences of property misevaluation. And here's a good point that I want to bring home to all of you here. And this is a quote, again, from the Washington Post. "Ultimately, under-evaluation of black communities could reduce property tax revenue to fund maintenance and improvements on local schools and amenities." The article continues to say, and I'm almost finished, Mr. Chair. The article continues to say, a 2021 study from Freddie Mac found that 12.5% of the appraisals from home purchases in black neighborhoods and 15.5% of Latino neighborhoods come in below the contract price compared to 7.4% appraisals in white neighborhoods. While home appraisals are supposed to be independent, fair, and objective estimates of market value, so lenders can adequately evaluate risk, results depend upon the appraiser's expertise and familiarity with the neighborhood. One of the things that is affecting the appraiser's familiarity with the neighborhood is, in fact, the Dodd-Frank Act that took place in 2008. And we all recall the crash in 2008. And part of the crash in 2008 was because some of the banks and the other lending institutions had too close of a tie with the appraisers. With the Dodd-Frank Act in 2008, it removed that close association with the appraisers. Now, however, what happens is that a lending institution now makes a contact with they call it an AMC, which is an appraisal management company. And that appraiser management company randomly selects an appraiser going out to that community. So now that I think I have talked enough about and hopefully convince you that appraisal bias does in fact exist, let me tell you what the bill does. I indicated earlier that the Biden administration put out a report. It's called a PAVE report. PAVE stands for Interagency Task Force on Property Appraisal and Value Equity. This report was just put out in March, several weeks ago, of this year. The reason why the bill is before you is part of the report asks for assistance. And I'll read the part of the bill that asks for assistance. In the report from the Biden administration, it says, the task force is seeking support from stakeholders who can inform, implement, and evaluate long-term transformational policy solutions that will radically improve the home appraisal industry. The PAVE report had several components to it. The components of that PAVE report are as follows, very briefly. And there are 5 points of that PAVE report that they're looking at. Policy guidelines and regulations, enforcement and compliance, advancing equity and increasing opportunities in the appraisal workforce, reconsideration of value process, automated valuation models, and alternative property valuation methods. And that last portion there is causing a lot of angst in some of the homeowners because that last portion, automated valuation methods, sometimes allows an appraiser not even to go out to the property. So those are the points that are listed in the PAVE report. Therefore, when I put together this particular bill, HB 1097, this bill, HB 1097, mirrors precisely what the PAVE report is seeking for advice from our stakeholders. HB 1097 on page 3, lines 7 through 15, help ensure the governmental oversight and industry standards and practices further valuation equity. Increasing training increasing training of appraisers to combat valuation bias. Remove barriers to entry into appraisal profession by minorities. Assist in the development of a model for a meaningful reconsideration of value process. And finally, reduce or eliminate bias related to automated valuation models and alternative property valuation methods. That's what this bill does. This is very important because as a state, our appraisers get their licenses from the Department of Labor. And I'm hopeful that with this task force, the Department of Labor can weigh in and put some information up the chain to the PAVE report. And with that, Mr. Chair, I will entertain questions.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much, Delegate. We'll start off with Senator Sidnor, and we'll go to Senator Huff, and then Senator Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and good evening, or good afternoon. I'd support the legislation, but I did have one question. On page 2, lines 11 through 13, and I want to make certain that I'm reading this right. You know what? Never mind. As I read it now, I think I understand what it's saying. Okay, never mind with the question. But I will make a statement.
Sure.
Because some of the things that you have spoken about, I believe were written. There was a book called Know Thy Wealth? Know Thy Price.
That's exactly correct. That's the exact title of the book. You are correct, sir.
And another book that I was reading by a law professor, Dorothy Brown, The Whiteness of Wealth. And in her book, what she talked about was how if black homeowners want to actually gain wealth through buying homes, she said you actually have to buy a house in a white neighborhood. because if it's over 10% black, for whatever reason, you're not going to be able to gain the same type of wealth as you would if you lived in a white community. So a lot of times, people who look like you and I, we hear that if black folk move to the community, we're going to lower property values. But I think the reality from looking at these books is not that we're lowering the property values, that the market dictates that if a community is too black, the wealth just isn't going to really be attained. Would you mind speaking to that?
I agree 100%. And those books that you referred to, I have read them, and they are as dog-eared and notes written in them, almost like a textbook. And the wealth sometimes, as I indicated in the very first sentence of the Washington Post, sometimes gets mis- or disevaluated, and sometimes just by who is in the house. And if I can give you a personal example, I didn't want to go here, but I'm going to give you a personal example. One of my daughters is married to a very fine white gentleman. They were selling the home in Ellicott City, moving to Laurel for a larger home. My daughter indicated to my son-in-law, when the appraisal appointment was scheduled, remove all of the family pictures out of this house. All of them. My son-in-law called. He said, "Dad, Tiffany is telling me to take the pictures down. I don't understand." I said, "Son, take the pictures down. I will have a beer with you. I'll explain it to you later." So, he did take the pictures down, fortunately, and they got what I thought was an appropriate appraisal value. But that, what I just explained to you, takes place all across the United States.
I'm curious, the reduce or eliminate bias related to automated valuation models and alternative property valuation methods. Specifically on the automated valuation models, what do you mean by that?
The automated valuation model is a process whereby an appraiser, like I indicated earlier, in most cases does not even go out to the property itself. They use data that has been collected by others to make the appraisal value. That's why it's called automated.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people in the industry who want to do away with that automated valuation process. And part of the study, part of the task force that I'm putting together in this bill looks at if that automated valuation process should in fact be eliminated, just like the PAVE report from the federal government looks at either how to alter it or to remove it as well. Because again, sometimes the appraiser does not even go to the property.
Yeah, no, I'm actually pretty familiar with this. My father, actually at about 2000, patented, probably should have been a billionaire, but he passed away and never went anywhere, but he actually patented a mathematical formula. He was a real estate agent, and he basically, my father had this theory that appraisers were unnecessary, and that basically if you took 3 properties that were alike, and then he figured out a formula that essentially got you the mean or plus or minus, and he could give you the valuation on any property. And it just seemed to me that it was essentially just a mathematical tool that worked, and he could even take from other states and whatever, but he argued you didn't need to go to the property and look, that you could figure it out that way. I don't know what would be unfair about that. That's just a mathematical formula that is giving you an accurate assessment of what your property's worth.
Sure, and I understand your question because I, like some of the others in here, I'm mathematically, my brain focuses totally on mathematics. I can tell people all the time, to the horror of my wife sometimes, my brain is focused like A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That's the way I think. However, when we have situations like discussed in the Washington Post article, where, for example, the Secretary of HUD, Marcia Fudge from Cleveland, I'm from Cleveland as well, by the way, from Cleveland, 2 blocks away, her house was was appraised $25,000 less than a White House 2 blocks away. Now, had the automated valuation process been adhered to, which appraisal or which mathematical model would they use? The $25,000 less appraisal model or the $25,000 more appraisal value? And I think that part of the evaluation process data task force needs to look at is that if that particular model is going to be used, what's the datum line? What are you going to start with? How are you going to establish the base? And I think that might be a problematic scenario there. What's going to be the base? Because you always have to have a base for the mathematical model.
I'll have to go back and read. Somewhere I have my father's old book on this. I'll have to go back and read it. It's just, anyways, it brought up memories of that because that was his whole article, which I think it was interesting because it gets away from what you were arguing, that taking down pictures or this or that, where it was purely a mathematical formula of pooling properties. It removed basically the human component to it, and he would argue that it was, it was a plus or minus. I can't remember what it was,
Yeah.
4 or 5%. You could get it right. So, all right, thanks.
I appreciate that.
This is JPR. We're not used to having the Pythagorean theorem recited to us. I like that. Good stuff. All right. I think Senator Carter was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill, Delegate Holmes. I think it's a good bill. When I first looked at it, I thought to myself, because this is how I am, why do we need a task force on this? Why don't we just pass something more, stronger? But I do think it's important for people to come together and decide on the best practices. We have a horrific history in Maryland of housing discrimination. My father led a fight for many years for fair housing in Baltimore City and across Maryland. The only question that I have is, in looking at the members of the task force, I don't really see any organization with a racial equity lens that's on it. It looks like the only group that represents consumers is the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, but everybody else seems to be industry folks. I would just suggest that maybe, and I don't want to mess with the bill, but maybe we might add one of those fair housing organizations to the mix. I'm just concerned because, let's be honest, no offense to the one entity that's on there to represent consumers, but it hasn't done anything at all this time. You know what I mean?
I certainly do. That's a good point. I wish I had thought about that earlier before Sine Die is approaching us, if you know what I mean.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Smart man. All right. Senator Cassidy and then Senator Watson.
Well, just briefly, it does provide for 4 representatives of the general public who live in the state of Maryland, appointed by the Speaker of the House, and 4 similar appointed by the President of the Senate. So you get 8 people who are not industry representatives. So that's a pretty large number there.
Correct.
And this is interesting because all we're really doing on this bill, so we're kind of getting far afield, I guess, but it is an interesting subject because all we're really doing is changing this from, looks more like a local Prince George's County to a statewide bill, right? By putting having them give it a state lens as opposed to just a Prince George's County lens, right? That's the focus what we have right now.
That is correct. And
Which seems fine. I have no problem with that.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if it's going to be a statewide task force, we shouldn't just be looking at Prince George's County, right? So that makes complete sense to me, right?
yeah, that is correct.
Right, so we'll have 8 people from around the state. But I am just curious, just since you've given us so much background, I mean, what, the goal of the commission is to have the appraised value equal what? I mean, I'm used to appraised values, all the appraisals I see are they take 3 or 4 comparables from the neighborhood and make sure that they have the same number of bedrooms, same size yard, roughly those sort of general characteristics, and you say, here's what the property will sell for to a willing buyer and a willing seller on any given day, and that's your appraised value. But, I mean, I assume that's what's happening. If it is, I mean, certainly the automated appraisal process would be more favorable to that because nobody ever goes there. They just take 4 houses from the same neighborhood. They've all got 3 bedrooms. They all have a, third of an acre lot, and therefore, here's the value based upon what things have sold for in the last 6 months or a year. What's our objective with the bill? What are we trying to,
Certainly. What you just described in terms of looking at the house, the size, the square footage, rooms, et cetera, and in putting a value on it is what is supposed to happen. You are exactly 100% correct. That is what is supposed to happen. And that's what I'm hoping that I want us to study to make sure what you are suggesting does happen. Currently, it does not.
Okay.
And so what I'm attempting to have us study is why doesn't it? And how we can improve upon the process to make sure that what you're suggesting does in fact happen.
okay, well, I have no problem with the statewide or with your amendments. I'm fine with it. I'm just curious. Thank you very much. Good
Thank
to
you,
see you.
sir.
Always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, Delegate Holmes, for your insight and expertise. My question is the goal of this bill to basically state that a 3-bedroom, 2-bath Ryan home in one community built with the exact same materials, the exact same way should be worth the same in another community?
Yes, sir, that's it.
Then how do you suspect the task force will deal with the inherent discount, which is what you're talking about, that's inherent in areas where, say, there's more crime than another, or the schools are poorer performing than another? Because we know from history that all those things impact property value. And so if you try to make sure that a property in one location is equivalent to a similar property in another, are you inadvertently pricing a subgroup of the population out of the market to be able to purchase a home because now the houses are higher?
I don't think we're going to be, and again, that's part of the process that I want to have the task force look at, because one of the bullet points in the task force is in fact the evaluation of the home itself. And I'm hopeful that the task force looks at those items that you mentioned, which are outside of the square footage, the number of bedrooms. Should that be a part of the appraisal process? And that's what I'm hopeful that the task force takes a look at. Is it going to be A squared plus B squared equals C squared plus or minus crime? I want to make sure that the task force takes a look at it and gives us some concepts on what it should be.
Okay, and I hope, task force sounds interesting. What is the total count on the number of folks? I'm trying to follow. I think it's 19 members of the task force. It seems pretty large.
I apologize. My Pythagorean theorem does not include addition.
I guess plus doesn't mean plus in that formula. All right. But I appreciate what you're trying to do, and I know it would make a big difference, and I'm looking forward to seeing what the results would be. So
Thank you, sir.
very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this bill. I think it's really interesting, and I did have a chance to read the Washington Post article. And one of the things that hasn't come up is the need for diversity in terms of appraisers, right? That brings a lot to this issue, and their own personal experiences, and there's just a lack of diversity among appraisers. And that I would hope would be one of the focuses of this group as well.
And if I may respond, interestingly enough, first off, let me answer your question. The task force does in fact have the appraisal industry to review the appraisal industry in its part. Just by coincidence, in the past couple of years, one of my other daughters, my youngest daughter, is a bachelor's in architecture and a master's in engineering. She is now going to look at home inspection and appraisal license. Just yesterday, my nephew called me, just finished his classwork on the appraisal certificate. Now he has to get under the tutelage of a licensed appraiser for, I believe it's 1,000 hours before he can become a appraiser. So in my own way, I'm trying to get the word out to make sure that we do, in fact, increase minorities in the appraisal business.
Thank you.
All right. This is the longest hearing on a task force bill that I've ever had, but it was instructive. This is really important, so I appreciate it. And thank you, Delegate, for bringing it to us. And thank you, Ms. Taylor, for your support and for the article. Inside of the article, there are a couple of great links embedded, and one of them is a Brookings Institute report that I suggest the committee takes a look at. It's pretty instructive in looking at it as we've been going back and forth here. But really appreciate you bringing the bill forward to us.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot. All right, with that, that'll end the hearing for House Bill 1097. We'll go on to Delegate Washington is here. So House Bill 1295, Delegate Washington, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, JPR, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman. Nice to see you all. Thanks for having me. For the record, Delegate Alonzo Washington here to present on House Bill 1295. This legislation will provide more options to families and individuals affected by secondhand smoke. The bill will simply require a landlord or common ownership group of a condominium to develop a policy on smoking. Many residents, I don't have to tell this committee anything about secondhand smoke and what the effects about secondhand smoke are. But many residents who have come up to me, many condo associations that have come up to me, stating that, there's no repercussions, there's nothing that could hold their neighbor accountable if they inhaled smoke from their neighbor that's directly next to them. If they smelled smoke or if they had smoke. And we know a lot of our families who have young kids live in condo associations. And so what we found out through some of the COAs contacting us is that there's no policy that exists. There's policies that exist on noise ordinances and noise at night or anything like that, but there's nothing on smoking at all. Not one piece of, not anything. It takes a long time for any condo association to develop those types of bylaws within their bylaws, that type of bylaw within their bylaws. And so this bill just says that it fixes the issue by requiring the ownership of a condominium or cooperative housing corporation to develop a smoking policy. This policy must include basic provisions such as the locations where smoking is allowed on a premises, any conditions on the ability to smoke in areas where smoking is authorized. Potential fines for violations of the policy does not state that you have to have a fine. It also says that there should be guidelines to submit a complaint about the policy violators. I would just say that I know that many of you have been contacted by folks who are against this piece of legislation. What I would say is that this does not prevent someone from smoking within their home. You can still smoke in your home. This just says that the common ownership community or the condo association has to come together to actually develop said policy. Whatever policy that is, whatever procedures they want to create, but they just have to come together to create it. And I just feel strongly that this piece of legislation will help guide that conversation, and it does not limit someone from smoking within their unit. It just says that not only does the smoker have a right to smoke within their property, but the person that lives adjacent to them has a right to clean air within their property too. And so we're trying to prevent the secondhand smoke that comes from one property to the next, and this bill helps to bridge that gap and have that conversation. So with that said, I'll take any questions, Mr. Chairman. I urge your favorite report on this bill that was voted out of the House. Thank you.
Not to kick a hornet's nest, but if you can have the adverse effects of smoke in a different unit, I wonder what that means for ingesting or smelling marijuana or cannabis smoke in the same car. Anyway, all right, we go. I saw Senator Huff, and then we'll go to Senator Hedelman and Senator Castley.
Yeah, just a question. So this covers everything. This would cover marijuana, cigars, cigarettes, everything, right?
Correct.
So I guess one concern is we allow medical marijuana, and so basically we could be inhibiting people's ability in their own property to use medical marijuana, couldn't we?
No. This says that you can still smoke medical marijuana or digest, however you take it, right? Medical marijuana in your home. It just says that there needs to be a policy within the condo association that's developed that states that if a person within their property experiences secondhand smoke from a neighbor, then that neighbor would be able to follow those procedures that's within that particular condo association, and there could be a conversation that's had to make sure that that situation is rectified. Right now, that's not happening in the state of Maryland. There's no, right now, if you live in a house, if you bought your condo,
Yeah.
and someone lives next to you, and they are there's and someone and you've had your condo for a long time. Someone moves next to you, purchase their condo, or they rent that. Let's say they rent that condo out, and that person that moves in is smoking marijuana. They don't have a medical marijuana card, but they're smoking marijuana, and that smoke comes within your house and infects you. Right now, there's no state law that protects that homeowner that has purchased that property a long time ago from this tenant that is smoking and comes and all that smoke comes into your home and affects your family. There's no repercussions for that tenant or for that homeowner right now, and there's no condo association policies within the state, I believe, except one in the state of Maryland that has a guidelines on how to make a violation.
Well, it sort of strikes me, I mean, in the House, didn't this come up that there's a basic tenet of private property ownership, that if I own a condo, in fact, my first place we rented was a condo, but then actually our first house was a very small townhouse, and it was actually legally considered a condominium. I don't know why, but that's what it was classified as. So
That's my house too.
Yeah, so we lived in a very small townhouse. You would have classified it, most people have seen it as a townhouse, but it was legally classified as a condominium for whatever way they built it or whatever. And so it just strikes me, though, that if I chose to every once in a while smoke a cigar in the basement of my townhouse or at my condo at that time, it's my property, it's my right. I bought it, I paid for it. So was there a discussion of that in the House about basic private property rights?
Yes, I mean, that's why the bill is passed as is, because it just requires that the condo association develop the policies and procedures for if a neighbor experiences secondhand smoke. You smoking that cigar, imagine there's a 2-year-old baby next door, and your smoke from your cigar goes into that home and affects that 2-year-old baby. For that parent, for those parents that are in that home, there's no protections from them from your secondhand smoke.
There's also the same thing where we don't have, if somebody plays, when you're living next to each other, you also have music, you have people that get up at night and move around, you have these different things like that. So if I go to smoke a cigar every once in a while and my neighbor says, well, I don't like it, and I say, well, too bad, it's my house, I paid for it, I'm going to smoke this, and,
Then there's now under this bill, because you passed this bill, Senator, now that there's policies in place under that condo association on how to proceed right now if that situation does arise. Right now, if your neighbor, that same neighbor, played noise at, had a party, didn't tell you about it, and it's 12 a.m. at night, and it's shaking your house, there's a policy and procedure within the condo association that says that that person can be fined, or here's how you make a violation, here's how you make a violation notice. Right now, the same thing isn't clear for smoking policies.
I just think, did people come in and testify to this? Because when we used to live in townhouses and stuff, we lived there for a long time, there was always issues. You have to, have a good relationship with your neighbor, because people would put a subwoofer on the wall, that was a normal thing, and they're watching movies, and you had to go knock on the door, hey, can you turn that down? And just kind of be neighborly to each other without legislating all this. Yeah. Did people come in and they were testifying about this?
Yeah, no, there were people who came in that testified on this. Some from Montgomery County, a few from Baltimore. There was a couple of different law centers or groups that came in and testified in favor of the bill and we added some of their amendments to the bill too. And so I would just say this, that there was a lawsuit, you can read it in the Washington Post, there was a lawsuit that neighbor to neighbor was suing their neighbor because they inhaled their secondhand smoke, and it went through about a 9 to 12 month process until they came to a settlement where the homeowner would actually just tear down the side of their property, the side of their wall, and reconfigure it so that the smell from the next door neighbor doesn't come into the home anymore, into the next door neighbor's home. So even going that far, that length of time to actually go through a lawsuit is your only type of protection. And even then, there's still no laws or policies on the book to make sure that there's policies and guidelines to complain if there's someone experiencing secondhand smoke from a nearby neighbor.
My experience is people always figure out a way to complain. You don't need a law to people complain, but
I'll tell you that someone has been through that process. My neighbors in my community have been through that process and talking to their neighbors multiple times and nothing has happened. Within my own neighborhood, nothing has happened. And so they've been through a 6-month complaint process where nothing has occurred at all.
Do we do this for, so with condos,
We do this for noise violations.
What about for apartments where you have more people are renters versus condos where people are more, there's more ownership? Do we do this for apartments now?
So apartments, they have their own regulations right now that they come up with, that they say there's either no smoking or there's areas where folks can smoke.
Do we have a state, is this in state law for apartments?
There's no state law that says that apartments have to come up with, from what I remember, or what I can recall, there's no law that says that they have to develop a policy.
Okay.
But for condos, it's different because they're condos and these are homeowners, right? These are people who own their property. So it's a little bit different from an actual apartment.
Last question. It says on the bottom, basically, nothing may be construed to preempt a county municipal government from enacting and enforcing measures regarding smoking policies of multifamily dwellings that are more stringent. Is that the law right now?
Yeah, this is just clarifying, because initially we included apartment buildings within this legislation, and AOBA, who was initially against the legislation, we removed pieces of it from it, and this was part of the amendment that was added to make sure that it was clear that this does not apply to multi-dwelling units, apartments, essentially.
Well, it says, this says nothing in this section may be construed to preempt a county municipal government from enacting and enforcing measures regarding smoking policies of multi-family dwellings that are more stringent. So AOBA want it in there, more stringent?
This is AOBA's language that we got from them.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yep.
I suspect someone's going to ask about nuisance law and how some jurisdictions have defined what nuisance is and where you bring it circuit court action for nuisance. Everything you've described seems to me would be nuisance. But I forgot who was next. So Senator Heddleman and then Senator Castleman and Senator Sinor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, thank you for bringing this bill. Literally, last night, I was reading a letter from a constituent that outlined a bunch of concerns about a homeowner association, but this was a big one. And I was talking with my staff about it, and we were like, I know there's some bill on this someplace, and then it appeared today. And so thank you. And we will tell her about this, and in fact, we talked about sending her the link to this hearing, so maybe she's watching. But what you're proposing is not necessarily to prescribe what that policy is, correct? It is to have a policy. Obviously, each individual homeowners association is going to develop one that is appropriate for those living units, right?
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
So even though your scenario about the 2-year-old and the cigar smoke, well, we would all want to protect our 2-year-olds from cigar smoke, they may decide, well, something else, right?
Right.
Because you're balancing the private property rights with the communal
Correct.
living space rights of
Correct.
people.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, this is a really tough issue, but I 100% think we need to do something in this area because you're right, if you have a significant investment in private property and then someone moves in and does something that totally, changes your living experience and your investment, that is really significant. So I would hope that it wouldn't be too much to ask for homeowners associations to have a policy, and they're probably not going to do it unless we make them do it.
Correct.
So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Hi, good to see you. So I am curious that, you've said that this doesn't interfere with property rights, but as I read through the entire bill, it's not that long, it would allow, take a situation, you have 6 units, 6 condo units, there's 2 smokers in it and 4 non-smokers. The 4 non-smokers could put together a policy and approve it that said nobody can smoke in their condos, around their condos, or in the parking lot. So they could in fact do that. And then if two non-smokers moved out and it shifted, then the 4 smokers could then say, we've just changed the policy, now you can smoke anywhere you want, and the 2 non-smokers would just have to breathe smoke. So it does sort of, I mean, it's interesting that the difference with, the chairman was talking about various nuisance ordinances, those just apply across. So I just see a challenge here where what we're really saying is the majority rules if this is either a smoking condo or a non-smoking condo, and I moved in because I don't smoke, and I moved into it was a non-smoking condo, and then a couple of my neighbors moved out, next thing I know, I'm in a smoking complex, or vice versa. It kind of goes back and forth. So maybe you have some comment on that. I don't see how that's addressed in the bill. It's a challenge.
Yeah, no, look, they can do exactly what you just said, Senator, which is they can, right now, without this bill, they could develop a policy that says whether the four of them want a no smoking bill, want a no smoking unit, or vice versa, right? What we're saying is come to the table now to develop said policy. If that said policy then changes, then that's up to that community they decide. So homeowners do decide. And then if a condo is, and then also, when you move into a condo, when you move into a condo building or a HOA, you're provided with the bylaws for that, and then you can review to see if you are able to smoke in that. And this, again, let me not go down that rabbit hole of whether to smoke or not to smoke. This bill does not say whether you can smoke in your building or not smoke in your building. This just says, come up with the policy, period. What do you want as a community? That if you have smoking within, what the smoking policy is, and how it affects your neighbor, and if it affects your neighbor. So we don't go down that road. We just say, develop the policy within your community, and we're gonna make you develop this policy, just like we do with any other nuisance.
So I got you, but the difference between like your condo, your association rules, your condo documents, those are public and they don't change. They're kind of set, they're there from the beginning. So I know I've moved into a non-smoking condo. I knew that when I moved in. If I wanted to smoke, I shouldn't have moved in there. Or I moved into a smoking condo, and if I wanted a non-smoke, vice versa.
Yeah.
But this says, what this allows is, it's just a local policy, and it would provide for penalties or other fines for violating, so unless I'm filthy wealthy and can just keep paying fines and pissing my neighbors off and not care about $100 fines, it would change. So now I'm moving in, and the policy said when I moved in, it's non-smoking, and my neighbors died, and it changed, and now my investment in a non-smoking condo suddenly became a smoking condo, or vice versa. And there isn't that notice of, this is as other restrictions on condos are, it's there. It doesn't matter if the neighbors change, it's a policy and you can't change it. So that's just my concern, is how this thing sort of flip-flops back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, but you can
Potentially.
compare. I mean, I don't know what your living situation is, Senator, but you can compare that to 2-a-day trash versus one day a week trash. 2-a-day week trash versus 1 day a week trash. That can flip flop versus who is on the board or who sits on the condo, what policy they have, or anything else, right? This does not say we do not dictate what that condo association does. We don't even dictate that there has to be a fine.
Yeah.
It just says that you should highlight whether there is a fine or no fine at all, if there's a violation of said policy.
Yeah.
So we don't go down that rabbit hole of deciding for them or flip-flopping for them, because they can do that right now. We're just
I got
saying
you.
what we know you can do right now, we're asking you to do it right now.
Sure. Okay, I mean, that's, the majority of people no longer smoke, and so what we're saying is, instead of us passing a law that says no smoking in condos and shared living spaces, we're saying, you guys do this piecemeal all around the state, and you're all gonna pass laws that-
But Senator, these are homeowners. They should decide
Yeah.
what the policy is within their community.
Gotcha.
We're
Okay.
we shouldn't dictate that as a state.
But we
shouldn't.
are, in effect, but thank you.
I disagree.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think you were reading my mind when you talked about the private nuisance, because that's kind of what I've been wondering, is just if you had any information on how this bill might affect that. I mean, well, it says on page 3, lines 21 through 23, that it's not going to affect, I guess, any civil action. So I'm curious, do you have any information about private nuisances in terms of neighbors suing neighbors in terms of smoking? I mean, I know for me, one of the concerns that I've had, or that I hear from constituents, is the issue with people smoking marijuana and it kind of wafting into their homes and so forth. I don't like smoke. I don't like the smell of pot neither. stinks. So, and to me, I mean, when you're talking about private property, I mean, I have private property too, and you're infringing on my private property, right?
Right, absolutely.
So, but I'm curious, do you have any information about private nuisance and how this, what you're trying to do might interact with these types of current civil actions in the state?
This wouldn't supersede someone from taking civil action against their neighbor. This would just provide there's a policy within their governing documents of that condo association. There's a lawsuit that could happen, but I have not seen a really successful lawsuit from someone that sued their neighbor for secondhand smoke because of we have not addressed this in state statute at all. The effects of secondhand smoke from a neighbor to neighbor dispute within a common ownership community. We haven't addressed that at all. Even the nuisance laws doesn't really, that I know in the state of Maryland, including in my city of Greenbelt, which I represent, there have been lawsuits, neighbor to neighbor lawsuits on secondhand smoke, that it was either dismissed or they went to settlement. So our laws are not really strong enough to uphold your rights as an owner who does not smoke, but that secondhand smoke is impacting your life now. And so what we're trying to prevent is we're trying to make sure that everyone has a conversation in these common ownership communities. Because once they have that conversation, they would then decide on the best policy for that community, and then that policy will be implemented and create guidelines and opportunities for people. And then if folks who don't, and once that policy is passed, hopefully, then anyone that purchases a property would be notified of that policy, whether or not they want to move in a place where these rules and guidelines are, whatever they could be. So I think
Is there
that.
notice?
Go ahead.
Is there notice in, so?
There's no notice in here. I was, the senator was kind of getting at that a little bit about the notice, and I do actually like that idea of a notice. We tried not to prescribe a lot of this stuff where we said, if we said another notice, then here we are prescribing things to homeowners. So I really want us to, focus on the actual policy that should be created. But I do think it's a good idea to provide notice to homeowners when they purchase their property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I've been thinking as this hearing's gone on, and you've identified one particular kind of a nuisance, but there are lots of different kinds of nuisances. There are other smells that could emanate from someone's apartment. There are noises, loud music. You could have vibrations. You could have animals, household pets and other stranger animals. You could have pests, cockroaches, bugs, and that sort of thing. But this bill just isolates one particular kind of a nuisance. And I guess my problem with the bill is it doesn't really say what should be done. It just says have a policy. So the policy could be you could smoke anywhere in the whole building you want without limit, or you can't smoke at all, or anywhere in between. So I guess my question is, if we're going to require a condominium association to adopt rules on smoking, why wouldn't we also require them to adopt rules on noises, vibrations, animals, pests, cockroaches, et cetera, et cetera? Why are we singling just smoking out?
Well, there are noise ordinances locally, and there's local noise ordinances throughout the state by county. So that's something that's already covered. There's also most of the times there is in the condo association governing documents, there's ordinances against noise, and if it affects you, how do you make that complaint? The Clean Air Act prevents anyone from just smoking anywhere, right? Like smoking, you just can't smoke anywhere you want, unfortunately for those smokers. You just can't smoke anywhere, right, because of that Clean Air Act, right? But to get at your point, the reason we're talking about smoking is because we're entering into a phase of this of our state where smoking could affect so many different people, where we have actually left this to the wayside, where we haven't seen anyone actually bring this issue up. So maybe I'm the first to bring this issue up about a noise ordinance or a noise nuisance, a smoking nuisance. And I think that's okay for us to do this. I think it's okay for us to have a law in the books that says all condo associations have to have smoking policies. There's already pest policies and how pests affect people. That's already in condo association governing documents and things of that nature. So those already exist. What doesn't exist is smoking. And I know that because my condo association told me that that does not exist. They do not have the word smoking within their governing documents at all. And many condo associations, one of my colleagues in the House of Delegates is a condo attorney. And she says that she has to work with condos far in between to figure out like what they want to do with smoking. And it takes a long time to actually develop a policy and put that policy through bylaws and things of that nature. So I have done research in the sense that there's a lot of condos that don't bring this up at all. And so many people are suffering from secondhand smoke, again, from their neighbor. And that nuisance law that we have on the books is not strong enough to win a court case. We shouldn't have to go through court for a neighbor-to-neighbor dispute. Instead, if the condo association had these policies in place, they can resolve them amicably through those policies. And so I'm just trying, with this piece of legislation, I'm trying to make sure that we resolve the issue of secondhand smoke, and how does this community want to tackle that issue, period.
Thank you so much for your answers.
You got it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I could get you to go to page 2, line 18, and talk about the smoking definitions.
Sure. What do you want me to talk about?
So it says burning any lighted material or substance. So I know that you've referred this to smoking, but that clearly would be that burning a candle would then be under that same regard.
Senator, I got to stop saying delegate on this side. Senator, I believe this is current. This is actually a definition that was taken from current law. So I'm not redefining what smoking is or what smoke means. So I'm not changing the definition here. I'm just highlighting here in this section.
I'm just trying to point out that what you're doing is you're attempting to say that if I want to light a candle in my condo, that I'm going to have the permission and figure out, because I think the way I look at this policy could be restrictive on the days of the week or the times of the day, right? If they developed an agreement like that?
Let me make something a little bit more clear. We're not stipulating what the policy is within that condo association. We're just telling them that they have to have a policy. Under this, I don't think your candle example holds up, because that's a scent. It's not actual smoke. It's a scent. So that's a little different from it.
I got to tell you, people that had their houses burned down by a candle would definitely tell you it was smoke.
Well,
Because where
I
there's
mean,
smoke, there's fire,
That's
right?
different.
And I'd also tell you that when you're talking about the scent, you're talking about incense, right? I'm old enough, when I went to college, there was a lot of incense, in the dorm rooms, right? What's that? That's what a lot of people called it. But the other issue that I had was, a lot of people in today's day and age, you see a lot of people have these vape machines, and they add healthy oils, and they're very fragrant, right? And so because we're talking about the smell of smoke, right? And
We're talking about secondhand smoke here.
we're talking about smoke or smoking.
We're talking about smoke, not the
Right, is defined as burning or carrying any lighted material, right? That's what we're talking about, the definition that's in your bill, right? That can be very broadly interpreted. And that's all that I wanted, you're talking about smoking in general, but the wording of your bill is much more broad than that, and the restrictions that would apply on people in their homes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further questions from the committee, thank you very much,
Thank you.
Delegate. And I guess, welcome to JPR again. I don't know.
I'll see you on Ways and Means.
Oh, whoa. All right. It's a two-way street. All right. All right, we'll have, so that'll conclude the testimony for the proponents of the bill. I think we have one opponent, Mr. Boreano. You're still here? There you are. Yes. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. For the record, my name is Bruce Bariano. I'm here on behalf of the tobacco wholesalers in very extreme opposition to this legislation. Now, I know my time's short. I have a lot to say. When you go into a condo association, you're going into communal living. Voluntarily, you're going into communal living. You're not living all by yourself, and you have to accept rules and regulations and restrictions. That's just what condos are about. Secondly, we're talking about a legal, lawful activity by adults, And what we're talking about is cigarettes, we're talking about cigars, we're talking about vaping, and we're talking about recreational marijuana. If it passes, we'll all be under this prohibition here, recreational marijuana, not medical marijuana, because the bill exempts that. And clearly, you are, by this bill, intruding and dictating on the activities lawfully in your home and in your common areas, and you need to have your own personal obligation of knowing what you're going into when you're buying it. I believe there are laws. I have 2 condominiums myself, so I've gone through settlements. You have to get the condominium documents in advance, the rules and regulations. You have to look them over. You've got to sign that you've seen them and you've gone over them. So when you go into a condo unit, you were given all of this by the attorney, by this settlement, and you need to know what you're doing. This is not a very simple bill. If you look at the bill, as Senator Bailey indicated on page 2 of the bill, smoking is extremely broad. It is not just cigarettes. It is all of the items that I indicated, including recreational marijuana. I'm not trying to get into that issue, but here, this committee in particular is doing this, but you're not going to be able to do that. And lastly, I know my time is getting up, but lastly, please, you go to page 2, if I may just have another moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you go to page 2, and you go to line 5, the governing body of the condominium association shall develop, mandatory. Then you go down to line 10, the policy under subsection C shall state, mandatory. And look at item number 1, the locations where smoking is authorized, the locations where smoking is prohibited, the conditions on the ability to smoke in areas of the property where it's authorized. And then go to number 19 on page 3, any fines and penalties. You're going to let condominium associations render fines and penalties for lawful legal conduct? This is Michigan. It really is. It really is. And lastly, and then I'll stop. Still on page 3, please go down to lines 24 through 29. Well, you start on line 20. Nothing in this section may be construed to, and go down to 24, preempt a county or municipality in this state of Maryland government from enacting, that's passing laws like you all do, or enforcing measures regarding smoking policies in multi-dwellings that are more stringent than this bill. That means if you pass this, localities and municipalities can pass laws more restrictive than this. With all due respect to the chairman, and you know, I love Montgomery County, but Montgomery County will go wild over this. They will. I know Montgomery County. So, you know, no one's talking about telling every county and municipality you can do something more forceful, more stringent. This is not the way adult activities should be regulated. I urge an unfavorable report. This bill is broad. It's fraught with problems. It violates everything, really does. And I'm not a smoker. I want to make that clear. Thank you very much. I would urge an unfair report. Be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Boriano. Well, for the unacquainted, Michigana is the Yiddish for...
Michigana is crazy.
Yiddish for crazy, there you
For
go.
crazy.
All right.
The one that really this bill is fakakta. Fakakta means you can't fix it. I mean, it's sort of an elevation of
Yiddish.
Michigana.
Yeah.
It really is.
Got it, understood. I appreciate that, that
My
clarification. All right, Senator Sidnor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Just talking about the last point that you made about the preemption, is there anything currently that prohibits the county or municipalities from doing this right now?
There's nothing in the law that permits it that I know of. The Clean Air Act that was referred to earlier by the sponsor does not relate to this subject area. That deals with businesses, restaurants, things of that nature. I am not aware of anything in state law that authorizes cities or counties in this state to have these specific powers at all in the property area.
I guess the way that I'm reading that, when you look at line 26, it says more stringent than a policy adopted under this section. So it's saying that it can be more stringent than that condo association's policy, not necessarily this. It's the policy that's created by the condo. Is that? I'm assuming from your testimony that's not your read. Your
No,
read
it's not. It's not. And I'm not. And if I may take a moment, Senator. So you go to line 20. It says nothing in this section can be construed. Okay. Then please drop down to line 24. So nothing can preempt. That means stop, or I know you know what
That's fine.
it can. I apologize. It can stop a county or municipality from enacting. We all know what enacting means. We all know what enforcing means. Measures regarding smoking policies, broad term, smoking policies, so it covers everything, that are more stringent. So nothing stops them from being more stringent. Stringent is, you know, a minimum. In other words, you can't go below it, but you can go above it. And so this section here empowers counties and municipalities to go above what this bill says.
Oh, but then it says, then a policy adopted under this section. So then we're referring back to the policy that's adopted by the common ownership community, right?
Which is broad if you look at 10 through 19, where they have to address all of those items on page 3.
Okay, thank you.
I'd be happy offline to talk to you further about it if you would like. Thank you.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Rich.
and thank you for the
Thanks.
additional time.
Thanks, thank you. All right, with that, that'll conclude the hearing for House Bill 1295. Thank you, Delegate Washington. All right, and that'll conclude our hearings for the day. We're going to take a 15-minute recess, and then we're going to vote on our voting list. So it's just a 15-minute recess.